On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, Scottie Barnes has signed his rookie max extension. It's a big deal in these parts. We'll get into what it means for the Raptors now and in the future on today's show. Thanks so much for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, June the 25th. It is NBA Draft Eve, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. The link is in the description of the podcast. It's going to be the place to be on draft night. We're going to hang out, do a little voice chat, talk about the draft as it goes down. Should be tons of fun. Great little chance to hang out with the sickos for me and come be one of the sickos in our Locked On Raptors Discord. Again, it's free to join. Link in the description of the podcast as always. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcasts. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. On the audio side of things, you can also go and support the show on YouTube. You can subscribe, then hit the notification bell and get a push notification every single time the show is about to premiere or go live. And going live could happen this week in reaction to big news, so be ready. Hit that notification bell stat. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And we will get started here on your Tuesday episode of the show, talking about the biggest news in the Toronto Raptors universe today. Mohamed Gay has been waived from his two-way contract. Vivek Jacob is here from Raptors in 7 and Sportsnet here to talk about this groundbreaking news. And also, I guess, Scottie Barnes signing a 5-year up to $270 million max extension. Big V, Mohamed Gay, what's up with that, man?
Man, devastating news on this Tuesday. I don't know how I'm going to recover. But
it's a bad day for Blake Murphy. Pour one out for our pal Blake.
This is the thing, right? This is the Raptors being very aware of the situation, being like, hey, we know there's some devastating news coming, but before we drop that, we are going to re-sign Scottie Barnes. It'll be okay. Remember when the Raptors
just one step ahead, chestnut checkers over here.
Remember when Kawhi left, and then the Raptors were just like, "We're signing Stanley Johnson. It's gonna be okay."
Yep.
This is the inverse.
Yes. Yes, of course, we'll have a chance to talk about Mohamed Gay another time in Summer League or something. Probably not. We're going to talk about Scottie Barnes today, who, of course, yesterday, per Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, signing a 5-year up to $270 million max contract with the Toronto Raptors. They like to frame it with the biggest possible number. It's most likely it's closer to 5 years, $225 million, unless, of course, he becomes eligible for the Supermax by going and making an All-NBA team, winning MVP. I think Defensive Player of the Year as well is one of the caveats which can get you, access to that Supermax. So what we're really looking at here is a deal that's for 5 years. It's going to start around $39 million in year one and round out to about $51 million in 2023, when notably a lot of stars around the NBA are going to be encroaching upon the $100 million a year mark as the cap is set to go up exponentially, or not exponentially, I guess, in definition, but 10% every year for the next who knows how many years with the new TV deal and gambling money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Big V, initial reaction to a deal that we all knew was coming. We all knew was going to be something the Raptors just had to pony up to do. What were your initial thoughts on Scottie Barnes signing his new deal to stick around in Toronto through the end of 2030?
Good for him. Good for the franchise. He's obviously the centerpiece, the face of the franchise moving forward. And so you would like that security and knowing that he's going to be around for the next while. And that's the biggest thing to take away from it. And now I think in some ways you could say this was the easy part. And now, we get into more of the difficult stuff, right? And building around him and building in the right way and getting the pieces that fit. And so you look at the way the franchise has, the front office, the organization as a whole has talked about him, has catered to him. Obviously, they see him as a top tier player in this league and expect him to be that superstar that you can build around. And so now the work begins. It's like, hey, okay, you know what you've got in this player. You know you have your own projection of what he's going to be in this league. And so can you build around him in the right way?
For sure. Eggs meet Scottie Barnes's basket. That's kind of the situation the Raptors are in now. And I don't think that's a bad place to be. I think there's probably still, not probably, there is a lot yet to be determined when it comes to the absolute ceiling of Scottie Barnes, right? The leap he took in year 3 was ridiculous. It was all encompassing. He got better at basically everything over the course of, his impact on the game. And I don't think it's fair necessarily to expect an exact replica of the leap you just saw from year 3 to year 4. That said, we just saw him do what he did. He's won Rookie of the Year. He has flashed really tantalizing high level talent and a dominance and an ability to assert himself upon a game. I think it's a worthwhile bet for the Raptors to say, hey, this is our guy that the whole thing is going to be centered around. Let's lock him in. And now let's get to what you just said is the hard part, is figuring out how to build team around Scottie Barnes and how to maximize it. And sort of, I think we'll get into this a little bit later on, but the calculation of when to go all in, when to be patient, I think that's a really fascinating thing here too with Scottie Barnes that, again, we'll examine a little bit later on as we examine a little bit of a fake trade that I may have done in the Locked On Raptors mock draft that could sort of indicate one possible way the Raptors could play this with Scottie Barnes. But all told, what he's shown at age 22, 28-6 with 2.8 stocks per game on pretty reasonable league average efficiency. Took the step from 3-point range, the playmaking, obviously the passing talent he has. Maybe it hasn't been totally realized playing within sort of strange contexts in a janky season last year with a constantly rotating cast of teammates. But I do think you give him a roster going in this season that was going to be the team for at least a couple of years, at least the core pieces. And I think there's plenty of runway here for Scottie Barnes to improve upon the already exciting start to his NBA career. The big question is whether or not he's going to go and earn that supermax as well. Let me ask you, Big V, what if you just had to put a number on it, a percentage chance that Scottie Barnes goes out next year and is good enough to earn all NBA consideration? Probably not going to win an MVP, but I guess we can leave that on the table as well. Defensive Player of the Year feels like a stretch, but he did make big strides on that end last year. What would you sort of just set as the expectation, the percentage chance that he does in fact make good on the requirements to earn that supermax going into the start of the contract in a year's time?
If I had to put a number on it, I'd probably say somewhere between 20 to 25%. I think a lot of that comes down to what I expect the team success to be next season.
Totally.
And I think especially if you're going to break through to make your first all NBA team, I think the team success has to be there to a significant degree. And I think, I think Tyrese Halliburton is a good example, right? The way Indiana kind of captured the imagination of people with whether it was the in-season tournament run and the way their style of play and all of that, it was just impossible to ignore, right? And so I think to have that type of season, the Raptors are going to have, a lot more success than they did last season. And I think that's the tough part for me to project. And then I think the thing that maybe improves his odds as well is just like the uncertainty that we now have with the 65 game rule, right?
Sure.
Where you might have guys who, based on the numbers, would be deserving, Joel Embiid, right? But all of a sudden they don't meet that 65 game threshold, and that opens the door for someone else to get in, right? And so you look at the guys who made all NBA this season, specifically if you look at the forwards, you look at Giannis, you look at Tatum, KD, Ant, Kawhi, LeBron, those aren't names that you're expecting Scottie to beat out.
Right.
But especially with the 65 game rule, I think it makes things more interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you there for sure. I think there's a world in which the Raptors are one of like the surprise darling teams of the league. It's not maybe the most likely outcome, but it's certainly there if Scottie Barnes takes the kind of jump that the Raptors seem to think he's capable of. If Emmanuel quickly continues to settle into the lead guard role and gets more comfortable there and takes a jump himself, like there's an avenue here for this team to be better than maybe the preseason win total projections might suggest. And if that happens, that is an avenue to getting yourself on an all NBA team. People love the surprise darling team. And if you're the best player on a surprise darling team, that's going to put you in the all NBA conversation. And look, he was an all-star last year, an injury replacement, sure, but that already puts him in what, like the top 30, 35 of the league, just as a starting point going into this year. Obviously, you got to get yourself to the top 15 or 20, depending on obviously injuries and eligibilities and all that, to have a real shot at sniffing all NBA. And it's a hard thing to do, but we've seen it before. We've seen it with Raptors guys before on, good teams, sort of okay teams, pretty decent teams. Like it doesn't take 55 wins to make yourself all NBA worthy. If the Raptors go out next year and win 45 games with Scottie Barnes being the biggest reason why, there's a very real chance that becomes a supermax deal, which, by the way, would still be fine in the grand scheme of things. We're going to get into how the Raptors books are set up going forward and sort of what to expect here in the years to come with Scottie Barnes. But I think one way or another, whether it's the regular max or the super max he ends up actually earning on his next deal, he is going to be a guy who sort of signed his deal just at the time that you want to sign new deals to if you're a team, right? It's going to hurt the players. They're going to make less money as the cap goes up, and he's going to look around at his contemporaries by 2030 and say, wow, these guys are making like a full max contract more than I am right now. But that's just the way things are. I think the way the Raptors have now set up their books going forward, with the certainty they have, with the sort of size of the contracts they have, that's all going to play into the Scottie Barnes experiment and how it all works out going forward too. So one way or another, Supermax or not, an absolute home run and a thing that we knew had to happen was going to happen, and now it has happened, and we can all rest easy if we were ever not resting easy at all. We will come back on the other side, Big V, and get into what the realistic expectations should be for Scottie Barnes next season and going into the next few years as he enters his early prime. We will do that coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the #1 sports book in North America. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. And thankfully, there's plenty of sports going on, even with the Stanley Cup final being over and the NBA finals now being wrapped up as well. Don't worry. You've got Copa America, the Euros, the WNBA is going strong. The Olympics are coming up in just about a month as well. All kinds of stuff for you to go and peruse over at FanDuel. And even though the sports calendar is a little lighter than usual, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily this summer. That's right. There's something in there for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. The summer really starts with the NBA draft tomorrow. And right now, Zach Edey plus 30,000 to be the first overall pick in the NBA draft. Just put like $1 down on Zach Edey being the first pick. If Donovan Clingan could be the first pick, Zach Edey certainly could be the first pick. It's a weird draft. Try to capitalize on said weirdness and unpredictability and smoke screens and subterfuge by just putting a single dollar down on Zach Edey, and you just might be the lucky winner of some scratch if he is in fact the first name called on draft night. Go right now to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the Locked On Podcast Network. Back at it here with Vivek Jacob from Sportsnet and Raptors in 7 as we continue to talk about Scottie Barnes inking a fat new deal with the Toronto Raptors. 5 years, $270 million at the high end, probably 5 years, $225. All right, next few years here, Big V. This is something you wanted to talk about, is sort of like realistic expectations for Scottie Barnes in the years to come. Very clearly the Raptors have high expectations for Scottie Barnes, evidenced by them giving him this contract and committing very much to him being the core of this team going into the future. What are you looking at as far as like a timeline here for Scottie Barnes to truly ascend into being a no-brainer best player on a good team, which I think is just kind of the goal for any core player that you have It's nice to imagine them being the best player on a no doubt championship team. There are like 6 guys like that in the entire world. So you got to temper your expectations a little bit. But Scottie Barnes being the best player on a playoff worthy team, certainly something that feels possible and maybe even so in the next few years here. What are you looking at as a reasonable timeline for Scottie Barnes' ascent?
Yeah, so I think with Scottie, one of the interesting things is obviously just his age, right? And being
Sure.
22 and having that runway to get better. Like, we could look at his next contract, and at that point we're talking about him, being 26, like looking at, another extension possibly, and being like, hey, he still hasn't reached, his prime yet,
Right,
so
right.
we're still looking at a pre-prime phase that could be really, really good. And I think for me, in terms of setting the expectations of where he is now, one-time All-Star, you look at, I'm not comparing them as players, but in terms of banking on potential and what they can become, Jayson Tatum, when he got his
Mhm,
rookie extension, that
mhm.
was when he was a one-time All-Star and a one-time All NBA,
Yeah.
right? And since then, now he is a 5-time All-Star, a 4-time All NBA guy, and an NBA champion. It would be amazing if we can say that about Scottie going
I,
into his
I
next
agree with you. Hot take.
And so what does that path look like? I think it looks like a guy who looks dominant on the defensive end that we've seen uh for significant stretches of this past season. I think it's a guy that continues to improve his post play. I think we've seen, that touch around the basket, uh, and that soft feel that he has. If he can, extend that to like the 3 to 10 foot range, I think that's a big thing. Like, if you look at his finishing right now, last season, and pretty much for his career, he's over 70%. But it's that 3 to 10 foot range where, in his rookie season, where we were all captivated by it, he was at 50%. Last season he was down to 42%.
Right.
And so I think that's something that needs to level up, if we're talking about that all NBA caliber type of player. And then, of course, there's the 3-point shot, right? We
Yeah.
saw a really nice start, first couple months for Scottie, and then it just steadily tailed off from there. And hopefully that's something that, the same way he came into uh, this past off season, going back to 2023, saying, hey, I really want to work on my conditioning. And
Mhm.
we've seen sort of that guy who uh had a lot to give in the fourth quarter, and we're wondering why it doesn't happen. And then he talks about his conditioning the same way. He starts to understand, hey, if I'm gonna have legs to take threes all season, I've got to really be ready for something like that, right? And do the work in the off season. And that's where I think we've seen a cleaner stroke. And so it's not necessarily the shooting stroke that I'm worried about at this point. It's more so just having the legs to take threes all season, and make those above the break threes. And so I think if those
Yeah.
components are together, that's where at 25, 26, you could be looking at, you know, a guy who's going to be a perennial and all NBA, top 10 player in the league, that type of guy.
For sure. It does feel like the scoring is probably the thing that's got to put him over the top, right? And I'm not saying that Scottie Barnes got to go be some 28 point a night guy, right? It would be nice. It'd be wonderful for anyone to be that. But I do think with the way he kind of impacts things across the board and the way they seem to be building the team around him with guys who can go get their offense in Emmanuel Quickly and RJ Barrett, guys who can score off of the attention that Scottie Barnes himself generates and the passing that he obviously has in his repertoire. Like, I don't think this has to be a team build where it necessitates Scottie Barnes being a 28 point a game guy. 24, 25 to go along with his defense and his playmaking and his rebounding. Like, absolutely, that's what you want to eventually see him get to. And I do really love the Jayson Tatum comp. I've been thinking about this a little bit through the lens of Scottie, not just during these playoffs, but for kind of like the last year or two, just sort of thinking about, okay, like trying to find comparison points, guys who had similar sort of hot starts and, maybe petered out a little bit and then kind of found their groove. And Jayson Tatum's a great example of that, right? He was incredible as a rookie, Took a couple of years to kind of figure things out, the inefficiency, the bad shot selection, which is still a thing for him. But, he's come a long way, obviously, as sort of just like an all encompassing player. And I don't think anyone would say Jayson Tatum is one of the sort of 5 or 6 best players in the NBA. I think he's very close to that. He's kind of on the fringe. And I do think, realistically speaking, that's probably the range you're hoping Scottie Barnes gets to, where he is, on the sort of fringe of first team All NBA, certainly in the conversation for All NBA year in, year out, whether it's second or third teams, and has ideally a supporting cast around him that helps kind of lift the whole boat, even though you don't have a Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic level. This guy makes you an instant contender just by walking on the floor type of guy. I think that's a pretty interesting comp. And look, it took Jayson Tatum 5, 6, 7 years to become the guy he is today. Scottie Barnes is going into year 4. I think it's fair to, now that he's got this contract, to expect and hope that even by the time he's through year 1 of his new deal, so his 5th season in the league, that he's already kind of knocking on the door of that perennial All NBA status. I think that's kind of the fair expectation here. Not to say he has to go and be All NBA, no doubter in year 5, but if he's in the conversation, if he's averaging 23, 24 and has kind of found the scoring side of things a little bit, the 3-point shot is at the least league average. Like, I think that's all stuff you can realistically say, hey, we need Scottie Barnes to be this. Otherwise, this whole thing kind of crumbles. Is that a fair, like, it's a lot to put on a guy, but look, I'm sorry, you give a guy $270 million potentially, and there's a weight and a burden that comes with that. I don't think that's super unrealistic to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think even, you go back to last season, and once Pascal was traded, it was also on him to be more of a leader, right?
Sure.
And I think when we criticize certain moments of that, whether it was, leaving the San Antonio game, the way things ended in OKC in that game, now you get that magnifying glass, and you get looked at a certain way, and you get judged a certain way. And so I think, uh, you know, going back to the Billie Jean King quote, pressure is a privilege.
Mhm.
He has earned that microscope. And I think uh, the Raptors believe he can be that type of player. He believes he can be that type of player. And so it's not about, uh, trying to be too hard on him or whatever it is. It's just, hey, this is kind of the expectation now, and that's what you're measured up against. And as Dwayne Casey says, once you tell on yourself, you got to keep doing it, right? And
Yep.
and you gotta, you can be kind of a victim of your own success in that way. And I think it's just about having a positive mindset about it and embracing that. Going back to that list he had as a rookie, right? Of all the things he wanted to be in the NBA and all the things he wanted to accomplish, right? And
Mhm.
it's just like being proactive and being positive about, hey, these are the things I said I wanted to accomplish. I've accomplished a good chunk of those things already, after just 3 seasons in the NBA. And so I think that n- now, to put yourself in this position where you can be looked at this way and judged this way, I think that's just something he should be embracing, and I think he will embrace.
For sure. And I mean, the Raptors are going to empower him too, right? Like, I think that's kind of been Darko Rajakovic's whole thing, is empowering his guys, and no one to be more empowered, or no one you want to empower more than the guy upon whom the entire thing hangs, right? Like, I think it is, it's huge. It's like he's the highest paid player in Toronto Raptors history. Like, there's a certain level of expectation that's going to come with that. Just I guess, sort of scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you feel that it's all going to sort of pay off for the Raptors here? Like, that they'll be vindicated in giving him putting again all of their eggs into the Scottie Barnes basket.
I would probably put it at an 8. Like, I
Hmm.
feel very good about him as a player and what he'll be in this league. And I think as you see this, like this steady rise of the youth against like the aging superstars of the league, and kind of the turning of the tide, I do think Scottie Barnes can be one of those players that you look at and say is going to help take this league forward.
Hmm.
I honestly believe that, and so yeah, I feel very confident about it. Like, I'll never when I say 8, like, I will add that I will never say 10 for anyone, just
Yeah.
because you never know injuries or whatever it might be, right?
Yep.
And so
Maybe Wemby, but that's
yeah, like
yeah,
Wemby's as close as it is, and I'll still put him at like a 9 or a 9.5, just because
sure.
again, you never know with the guy, his size, his frame, like what could happen. You never want to think of those things. You never want to, even put that out into the universe. But there is always that element of uncertainty with an athlete.
No doubt. I'm with you. 7.5, 8. If you had asked me a year ago, I probably would have been around a 5. Honestly, I was notably that idiot who was like, trade him for Damian Lillard. Who cares? Yeah, glad they didn't do that. That would have been silly. Either way, coming up next, more trade ideas from yours truly, and also a look at how the Toronto Raptors can go about building around their franchise cornerstone. They've already started the process, obviously, but how can they finish the build? We will get into that coming up in just 1 second. All right, rounding out the show here, just before we get into the challenge that is building around Scottie Barnes going forward, a reminder, Locked On Sports Today 24/7 is our all-day streaming channel over on Locked On Sports Today, the YouTube channel. You can go check it out. It's wonderful. Subscribe, and it's 24/7 content covering all the biggest stories in sports from our local experts, covering it the only way only the way that we can at Locked On. Of course, the Stanley Cup Finals concluded dramatically last night. Locked On Panthers, Locked On Oilers must be checked out today. They'll be running over there, and of course, all sorts of great stuff covering all the draft on the NBA and NHL side, baseball season, and so on and so forth over there at Locked On Sports Today, 24/7. All right, Big V. Building around Scottie Barnes, I think we've seen the very beginning of it. Obviously, Emmanuel quickly, I think, was pinpointed by the Raptors as a guy who fit and melded with the skill set that Scottie Barnes has. We get to see the chemistry really flourish, but I think it's on its way with a full season playing together. I think those two guys are just too good, and their skill sets are too complementary for it to not work. RJ Barrett obviously figures in here. We know Grady Dick, the sort of 3-point shooting, the movement shooting threat that he figures to be down the line. That figures to be a really nice complement to what Scottie Barnes does as well. They've started the process here of building a Scottie Barnes friendly basketball team. It's not perfect by any means. You maybe want more of a spacing threat at the 5. You obviously want some wing defense to allow Scottie to play more in his natural defensive position as a low help man and rim protector and things like that. Sort of a mess cleaner on defense, if you will. And I think there are multiple ways the Raptors can go about this. I think this sort of the standard chalk answer is, just tank next year and go find yourself a player in the draft, which is an option, certainly. Like if things don't go well next season, it starts off poorly, they're not, looking like one of those darling teams. They certainly will have an escape hatch to go and tank down in the draft order. How far you need to tank. Ask the Pistons how valuable it is to actually be number 1 in the lottery odds. It doesn't always help. It's a flattened lottery odds world and all of that. But that's one way to go about it. There's the other way that says, hey, you got Scottie Barnes now. Why don't you go and supplement the roster with guys who can help today? We'll get into an idea I have for that I performed in the Locked On Raptors mock draft. But in general, Big V, you're the Raptors front office. You're kind of sitting there right now. You've just signed Scottie Barnes to this massive new deal. What is your sort of thought process on the types of players that need to be brought in to still supplement this roster and the avenues by which they can go about doing it?
Well, I think legitimate 3-and-D guys are going to be at the top of my list. I think when you look at players to complement him, obviously Scottie's going to be handling the ball a lot. Quickly's going to be handling the ball a lot. And so what are the type of players you want around that? As you said, if there's a spacing big out there that you can work towards, then sure. But, Jakob Poeltl is a good option for right now. I think the pressing need is at that 3-and-D, right? And obviously you've got a big name that you're going to mention, but I think if you were to look at, hey, what's a team that's maybe feeling the squeeze of the cap a little bit, and you look at the Pelicans with their situation with, Trey Murphy and Herb Jones and Najee Marshall, and like, is there some give there, and who might potentially be available? I think that's kind of the type of player that you're looking for, and sort of the avenues that you're looking for to maybe improve the roster here and now. without really having to give up too much, right?
Yeah. For sure, right? Like I think, the sort of hope you get the next guy to help out in the draft idea next year is fine. I also think it's fraught with all of the uncertainty that the draft typically is. And hey, maybe you get the fifth pick and you get a Thomas Robinson level fifth pick and not a very good sort of ready-made guy to go slot into your core going forward pick, right? The draft is never as certain as it feels like it's going to be, even if you really believe in your scouting process and everything. It's a hard thing to get right. The lottery balls go the way they will go, and you have no control over it. And I do think, people keep on saying it's a rebuild. They're rebuilding. Like, it's not a classic rebuild. I'm sorry. Like, all of their most important players are either soon to be on second contracts or already are on second contracts going into this year. It's a different situation than an Orlando Magic, who have spent a long time in the wilderness, got some young guys on cheap contracts, and now have salary cap space to go and supplement those cheap contracts before they can then go and add. There's a real case to be made that this summer, a summer where the Raptors have some cap flexibility, whether to use to absorb contract and trade or go sign a free agent, which feels less sexy now that Malik Monk's not out there and the free agent crop looks pretty grim. But like, there's an argument to be made that this is the last summer for the Raptors to really go and choose their guy to add to this core. They can go and, hope the draft thing works out. But again, as we've talked about, it tends to take 3, 4, 5 years for guys to really come into their own in the NBA. And anyone you take in the 2025 draft, you're lucky if he's really contributing to winning basketball by 2027 or 2028. Like, the time ticks quickly when you have a player as good as Scottie Barnes, and you got to start getting things in place right now, I think. And so for me, I think there's a case to be made that this summer, it doesn't seem like it's likely to happen, but I do think there's a case to be made for the Raptors to kind of go and make a big ballsy trade, somewhat similar to what the Wolves did with Rudy Gobert, where they said, hey, we have Anthony Edwards. We think this guy is going to be a superstar. We think this guy is worth betting on with our future asset capital to go and get a player in now who complements him, who we can go and run with. I think there's a case for the Raptors to be thinking through that lens as well. And a thing I did, and look, I do this all the time in the annual Locked On NBA mock draft. I like to mess it up with dumb, big, stupid trades because it's fun and it's a fake exercise anyway. But I did pull off a trade in our Locked On NBA mock draft. And I'm not saying the Raptors should go do this specific trade. I'm not saying I didn't overpay, but I think it's illustrative of what the Raptors could go and theoretically try to do this summer to really bolster the Scottie Barnes team. And I'll get into the reasons why I think it's a decent idea in a sec. But let me show you here first. I pulled off a trade with the Brooklyn Nets in the Locked On NBA mock draft. The Raptors get Mikal Bridges and Day'Ron Sharpe, who's a good, nice, cheap backup big man. And they send out Bruce Brown's contract, Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji. Sorry, Big V, he's your boy, I know. And then this year's first round pick, so 19th overall. The Pacers pick from 2026, and then the Raptors top 3 protected picks in 2027 and 2029 out the door for Bridges and Sharpe. And people may look at it and say 4 first-round picks. 2 of them weren't even really the Raptors to begin with, and it's kind of a completion of the Pascal Siakam string of transactions to me. Thoughts on this? Am I totally out to lunch? I just think a deal like this, Mikal Bridges, no-brainer, excellent fit on this Raptors team. Day'Ron Sharpe, a nice bit of depth as well. And Mikal Bridges, like, if you were to just sort of think up in a lab a player who would fit perfectly on a team with RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Scottie Barnes, and Jakob Poeltl, Mikal Bridges is probably that guy. You'll have to overpay because there's going to be a bidding war for his services this summer if he's available, one would think. So you got to probably get uncomfortable with it. No doubt about that. But as we've seen with the Wolves, if you overpay for the right guy and you blend him with a rising star who's coming into his own, you can feel pretty good about that. And in this trade, the Raptors only give up 2 of their future picks, and it's down the line. They keep 2025. They keep their own 2026. So there's still stuff to work with and to add to the team with in the next couple seasons. Again, not saying this is going to happen or should happen or will happen, but just an example of what the Raptors could be thinking of when it comes to bolstering Scottie Barnes now, making the Anthony Edwards bet. What do you think of that concept, Big V?
I like the concept a lot. I think, again, in tying together what I said about needing a 3-and-D guy, if you went and got, or hypothetically got the best 3-and-D guy out there that you can get on this roster. And, I think Bridges would be a phenomenal fit next to Scottie and Quickly. And I think when you look at the future of that core, it would be amazing. But do I think Brooklyn, right after hiring Jordy Fernandez, is it leading towards going in that direction? I'm not so sure. But
They should be, by the way. The closer Mikal Bridges gets to getting paid and walking in free agency, the less they're going to get back for him, and the Nets are going nowhere fast with him as it currently stands.
yeah,
Which was basically
so
my sort of putting down and sort of belittling Adam Armbrecht of Locked On Nets pitch to make that trade happen.
yeah. I think the other element of this is probably, hey, how open are the Raptors to kind of emptying the cabinet of first round picks right
Mhm.
after they went through a stretch where, picks were pretty hard to come by.
Sure.
uh, I think that's the other element of this. But again, coming back to just your concept of, hey, we're in the here and now. Like, can we accelerate this? Is there a path? Is there a player that's out there that a team is looking to move, or a player is looking to move away from a team? If that scenario presents itself, we know the Raptors are not shy uh, about asking for that player.
Mhm.
And so, especially with a fit like Mikal Bridges, I think that could be excellent. So yeah, in terms of the concept, I'm all for it.
I just think, and again, Bridges, he's only making 20 something million bucks for the next couple seasons before he gets expensive. So it's a bit of a different thing, but he'll get expensive at a time where the cap has gone up a couple of times and all of that. But I do think, you know, the second apron is a thing, and the way the league is going to operate is going to change. And I think, considering they're already probably going to have Scottie Barnes on what's going to be considered a bargain contract by the time he's in year 2, 3, 4 of his deal, just based on what everyone else is going to be making as the market explodes, as the cap goes up 10% year over year. They're going to be in a position where, like, they can probably hoard some like 20, $30 million contracts, maybe not go the full sort of Scottie plus another max guy or two model. But if you can go and build a team with Scottie Barnes on a max and then a bunch of very good 20 to $30 million players, I think that's an avenue to be successful in the sort of new landscape of the NBA. They have to be good players, obviously, and maybe one of those guys ends up becoming a max guy down the line. But I think, considering you're probably going to have Emmanuel quickly on a deal that will age super well, in addition to Scottie Barnes, as we know, RJ Barrett's under contract for 3 more years at sub 30 million bucks a year. That's going to age pretty well. I think there's a way here for them to stack their books with just like a lot of good players around a guy who is going to be, by definition, underpaid in Scottie Barnes. And I think, a guy like Mikal Bridges could really help them go and do that, right? Someone who for 2 more years is making 20 something million bucks. Maybe you give him a sub max OG Anunoby level contract when he's up for a new deal. But even then, like, I think that's going to fit in just fine to the books as the cap goes up. I think there's just, we've yet to really understand the way the second apron is going to change things here, V. And I think we're going to start to understand it this week. I think we'll see with the second round picks that I think a lot of teams are going to value, because it's sort of one of the only things the second apron teams and really expensive teams can use to improve their teams. We might see the value of that when it comes to a guy like Bruce Brown and all of that, and the 31st pick, et cetera, et cetera. The Raptors, I think, are in a good spot one way or another with how their books are set up right now. But I do think even bolstering it with a big move this summer that maybe comes out of left field to add to that collection of very interesting players on reasonable contracts could be kind of the way for them to really set the Scottie Barnes era up for success. I know I'm the big freak who likes to get rid of all the picks and trade for good players. For some reason, that makes me a pariah, but that's kind of where I'm at on this. Any last thoughts on the challenge ahead here for the Raptors to build a proper team around Scottie Barnes?
I think just the last thing I'll say to tie in with the points that you've been making here and your concept of like trying to act now is, like, in terms of that second apron, it's part of why the franchise was ready to move on from Pascal Siakam, right?
Sure.
And I think the
Sure.
evaluation was just, hey, if you're paying that much money to a player, it better be the absolute perfect fit.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't see it that way. And so if you get that 3-and-D prototype, because you need some of that volume shooting, then I think you're more willing to fork up that kind of money for the right fit.
Sure. Yeah, and I think there's also a case to be made that you make your 2 picks in this year's draft and you don't go crazy this summer. Maybe you wait a year to really go make that swing move, and you see, how do the guys you took this year figure into the long-term plans after a year? Are they projecting to be rotation pieces for you? Is there untapped star upside with one of the guys you take? I think that can be a reasonable course here, but I don't think they could really afford to wait around too much longer, right? It's not a typical rebuild. These guys are under contract. The clock is ticking, and I do think that with some internal growth, they could be a surprising team in a sort of weird and strange and influx Eastern Conference next season. And maybe that informs their next big move as well. We'll see. But either way, Scottie Barnes, a Raptor for a while. It's exciting times. Big V, anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
Usual stuff. Sportsnet, Raptors in 7. If you want to read more about, the Jayson Tatum, Scottie Barnes career trajectory parallels, you can head over to Raptors in 7 for my latest post and kind of just looking at the long-term outlook of the Scottie deal.
Awesome. Everyone go do that. Everyone go find V on the BAT website at Vivek Jacob. You can find me at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. You can join us in the Discord again. Come hang out for a little voice chat hangout we'll do tomorrow during the draft. And, again, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss shows this week as all the breaking news is going down. Free agency is like 2 days after the draft. There's no break whatsoever. It's just going to be scrolling social media looking for agent speak from various insiders all the live long week. That'll be fun. Either way, thank you so much for rocking with us. We'll be back again tomorrow. Hoping to have a pretty fun little draft exercise on the day of the draft. I'm looking forward to that. I'm not going to spoil too much because we're still working on scheduling with a very, very busy draft expert who's been on the show recently. But either way, that's to look forward to tomorrow. And then, of course, we'll be doing instant reactions, breaking down hopeful Bruce Brown trades, et cetera, over the course of the next many days. Hell, we could have like 7 podcasts in the book by the time Sunday rolls around. Either way, love you all. Thanks for hanging out, and we will talk to you again on Wednesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.